should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
Hey guys, welcome back to the video. In this video, you guys my spoiler review and breakdown of She-Hulk episode 4. And before we get into videos and here and you enjoy all my movie and TV show reviews, reactions, and breakdowns, make sure to subscribe button and notifications on so you don't miss any time I open a video or go live. But wasting more time, let's get into it. So we start out the episode with Donnie Blaze, and through the marketing, a lot of people thought he was going to be related to Johnny Blaze, but we found out that he's not related at all. They didn't even bring him up. I personally didn't even see the trailer that he was in, but a lot of people speculated that he was going to be Johnny Blaze's relative or something like that. But again, he's not related to him at all whatsoever, but he does use drunk people for his magic. And this is how we get our first story of the entire episode going. It cuts to Wongers in Nepal and he's watching The Sopranos, and a little detail that I noticed while he was watching The Sopranos is that they do show a little part of the HBO Max interface on the TV. I don't know how they got to write the rights to that and also The Sopranos theme song music, but they did, and that gave me a little bit of a chuckle. And I'll also be honest, I thought Wongers and Madison were a great duo. I did find Madison very funny when she was paired up with Wong. I feel like a lot of people are just gonna find her super annoying and unbearable, but I personally thought she was very, very funny. And anytime she was with Wong, it elevated her character and their chemistry was just so good. But speaking of pair-ups, I do want to talk about my favorite part of this episode, and that's just how it felt like a comic story with two characters that needed each other for something so their stories could cross over. It wasn't anything too over convoluted. It wasn't a major built-up story. It wasn't life or death. It wasn't anything super huge like the biggest Marvel crossover event ever. Their paths just aligned and they needed each other. They needed other characters' skills, so they basically collaborated. I honestly think that works very well here, especially in 9 30-minute episodes with characters that are reoccurring like Wong. Even though Madison wasn't in the last episode, she was really the only new character in this episode, again, other than Donnie Blaze, but he wasn't really like a cameo character. Of course, the second storyline did revolve around him, but Wong is the main one that's been reoccurring so far. This actually gets me pretty excited for Daredevil in the episodes. I do know that obviously, he's going to be kind of jokey. He's going to fit the tone of the show. He's not going to be super serious. But the way that they've written these characters into the shows, it doesn't feel forced. It feels like these characters are just coming together for strictly story purposes. And I really like that. Now, I know I didn't make a video on last week's episode because I was traveling, but I did enjoy the episode overall. My only problem was the shape-shifting elf from Asgard. In that case, I really just didn't enjoy. But this week's case actually felt plausible. It felt real and it didn't feel weird to me. Last week's case felt like they were just jumping around random things to make the case work in line with the episode, but here everything works on its own and I really like that. And then from there we do start a new subplot with Jennifer Walters and how she's going on a few different dates, and I thought that the introduction to the subplot was actually really good, and we do get a few really fun things regarding this subplot and maybe even a villain tease, which I'll talk about later in this video. And then we cut to the courtroom scene where they're working on Donnie Blaze's case, and again, I thought this was way better executed than last week's case in the episode because the humor was actually very funny. All the stuff felt plausible, and obviously, there's a lot of suspension of disbelief. Like, they're not going to let some drunk person come up and testify in court, but that's just the comedic nature of this show, and that's kind of what I want to talk about here. I think that the comedy of this show is really good. You definitely have to suspend your disbelief a lot though, but that's also makes it better because it's not 100% set in reality. Like, again, they wouldn't let a drunk person testify in court, but also they're making up these different rules for it to fit into the MCU. It's not a super serious lawyer show like Better Call Saul, but it integrates the comedy in a really great way. At least this episode does, and that was my biggest issue with last week's episode, which was that, again, it was just too goofy. This one, it actually makes sense. They're talking about the fate of the universe, and Wong actually adds a little bit of like weight to the situation, whereas last week the elf was literally impersonating the judge, and again, that wasn't anything that interesting to me. This week they actually dive a little more deep into the mystical art side of it, and I think that's very cool. Again, you definitely have to pick and choose here with this show, which I really don't like. I wish they chose a specific tone they want to go with, and I do think next week, when we'll talk about this setup at the end of this episode later, but I think next week talking about the copyrights and all these different aspects of superheroes themselves, that has a lot of big potential. Then we go back to the dating story, but now Jennifer Walters decides to set her profile as She-Hulk, and then she goes on a few different dates. There's different guys. She goes to one where he's absolutely obsessed with his strength, another one absolutely obsessed with her superpowers, and a bunch of different narcissist unrealistic guys. But one guy really stood out to me is very interesting, John Bass. Like, at first I didn't think much of his character, but as he kept talking, it made more sense that he could possibly become an actual villainous figure in this show. Because at the end of the last episode, when the goons attacked Jennifer Walters, they were trying to stab her. John specifically asks if her skin is impenetrable.
What about super speed, night vision, impenetrable skin?
But not only that, but he's also asking a bunch of weird questions in general, as if he wants to use her blood to become a superhero himself. This makes even more sense because before the show came out, there was an article that came out talking about a Tony Stark copycat in this show. He could be a wannabe billionaire philanthropist type guy hiring smaller level goons to go get stuff from superheroes. An example could be She-Hulk's blood to turn himself into a superhero. But after this, we do see She-Hulk go on the date with the quote perfect guy. And while all this is happening, the parallel story does show Blaze unleashing a bunch of demons and Wong gets to go help him. Mid-day, Wong calls out She-Hulk to come and help him, and we get a little bit of an action scene here. And honestly, it's not anything that special, but it is just action. It's not bad, but honestly, it's not really that good either. I will say I absolutely love the CGI in this episode. There's one or two shots in the courtroom that aren't that great, but other than that, I thought it was very, very well done. A lot of the dating scenes, the scenes in her house, as well as the fight, they were all very well crafted in my opinion. And again, I know I didn't make a video on last week's episode, but the fighting at the end of last week's episode, that CG was absolutely awesome. Though last week's lows in the CG were very, very bad, I think this week's episode turned it up a lot, and I'm super happy with the production of this specific episode. The next morning, we get a little update on her date, and this is what's most interesting to me because since Walters isn't in her She-Hulk form anymore, her date isn't interested at all in her and he leaves. I think this is a very quick and very well way to humanize Jennifer Walters. We know that she's struggling between the comparisons between She-Hulk and Jennifer Walters, and I thought this is another great way to visualize that. And then we get a pretty big tease for next week's episode. So as the date is leaving, we see that Titania has trademarked the She-Hulk name. And honestly, this is super interesting to me. Like I said before, I'm enjoying the comedical aspects of the show, and I think this episode balanced the comedic and serious weight of the actual crimes that were punished and stuff that actually happened, again, unlike last week's episode. But I do think next week's episode regarding the trademarks of superheroes could be very interesting. The legal side of this seems very, very in-depth. Like, how does a superhero trademark work in the MCU? Do heroes get a cut of it? Does it go to the public? And hopefully next week's episode is more of a legal heavy episode because, again, I find that super interesting. I think this episode balanced it very well. But overall, I do think She-Hulk episode 4 is the second best of the series so far. It is easily the funniest episode. I still have a special spot in my heart for episode 1. I absolutely love the formatting of the episode, and I just really loved how it set everything up. But this episode is absolutely hilarious. Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments down below. Come back next week as I will be breaking down She-Hulk episode 5. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.